Hello and welcome to the stream. Tonight it is February 10th. That song is a royalty-free song from Artificial Music called Herbal Tea. I've been looking at music a little bit because the thing about it is originally the music I was using, I thought it was completely free. It was uploaded to a very small channel that had like 100 views per video or so, and like 1 or 2 subscribers, or maybe a dozen. But I got a copyright claim on one of my streams, which wasn't a big deal. It just meant that I couldn't monetize that particular stream archive, because apparently that song was actually stolen from a music library. So the song I had been using it didn't even belong to the channel that I had been using it from. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with the fact that, they would want me to pay for their music or whatever, and I would have been happy to, but they charge a regular fee for that, and I'm not in any position to be paying that. Even though it is very nice music. I found this other channel, Audio Library Music for Content Creators. As far as I can tell, as long as I don't make money off the song, I'm free to use it, and so long as I attribute the artist properly. That song in particular was maybe a little more upbeat than I was looking for, maybe a little more dubsteppy, but, well, I don't mind. So let's begin by taking a look at the homepage for Wikipedia to see what's been going on today. Oh, that's interesting. Today's featured article is an article on the characters from Final Fantasy VIII, which is sort of a random choice, but okay. In the news, Bruce MacArthur pleads guilty to 8 serial killings in Toronto, Canada, and is sentenced to life in prison. In American football, the New England Patriots defeat the Los Angeles Rams in the Super Bowl. The United States and Russia suspend the intermediate range nuclear forces treaty. In association football, the AFC Asian Cup concludes with Qatar defeating Japan in the final. I think I might have read those last week on stream. Although I have deleted that stream, so, whatever. Also, there's a picture of a mastectomy. But we're not going to talk about that because that's a little weird. So truth be told, I do kind of struggle to decide what I do or do not want to cover on this stream. There are a lot of things which you could potentially talk about, and I like reading. I like reading things like history or mythology. These things are kind of boring, however, and so I'm not so sure that everyone else would appreciate me talking about them. But anyways, I could read one of your poems, Kimmery. By the way, welcome to the stream, Kimmery and Shelby. Thank you again for coming out and being the only people who ever watched this stream. It is greatly appreciated. If you want to send me your poem, I will read it. I'll do that, because I'm crazy. I can give you advice, and I will warn you that I'm not very good at poetry. That is something I struggle with, but I am more than happy to read. And in the meantime, however, I think I want to take a look at some of the Wikipedia articles that I have stashed. Um, I don't know if either of you have the same thing, but sometimes I kind of get lost in Wikipedia where I'll look something up and then I'll kind of go down this rabbit hole where I'll be like, oh, this is kind of interesting, but what's this other article about? Or what's this thing? And then I'll read that and I'll be, oh, that's interesting. And then it leads to another article. And you keep doing that until you've read like 10 different articles and you're like, oh, well, that was 3 hours well wasted. Um, I do that a lot, but some of the more serious articles, I'll stash them away because I'll be like, I don't want to read this now, but I do want to read it. And those end up just essentially getting squirreled away, and I almost never get around to actually reading them. But um, the funny thing, I guess it's funny. I don't know if it's haha funny, but it is funny in the way it's like your brother. He's kind of funny, so be nice to him. I used to use Firefox mostly as my internet browser. That was my go-to. But that was my go-to for a long time. I switched over to Google Chrome, but what I used to do with Firefox is I didn't have a home page. Instead, I put my settings so that it would open the tabs that I had open. Um, ah, Getting bombarded with a sonnet. I'll read that in just a second, but I'm on a spiel now, so I don't want to stop because I like talking about myself. So I used to use Firefox, and my settings instead of a home page is that it would just reopen the old tabs I had open. So maybe I was on Wikipedia and I'd be looking up something like, I don't know, the Shanghai Massacre, and I was like halfway through the Wikipedia article. Well, rather than bookmarking that page or saving it to my pocket or anything, I would just close out the browser and then I'd come back and immediately it'd take me right back to that Wikipedia page. And I would do this, but I would also stash away Wikipedia articles. And so I have in front of me my Firefox, which has 6 tabs, which I opened and stashed and never actually got around to reading. And just for fun, I'm going to read the first one, or rather the sixth one, which is the one that it opens up to by default, which is the Wikipedia article on Norse cosmology. Now, Norse cosmology is the study of the cosmos as perceived by the North Germanic peoples, who are the Norse. The topic encompasses concepts from Norse mythology, such as the notions of time and space, cosmogony, personifications, anthropogeny, and eschatology. Like other aspects of Norse mythology, try saying that 20 times fast, these concepts are primarily recorded in the Poetic Edda, a collection of poems compiled in the 13th century, and the Prose Edda, authored by Icelander Snorri Sturluson in the 13th century, who drew from earlier traditional sources. Together, these sources depict an image of 9 worlds around a cosmic tree, Yggdrasil. That's just the beginning of the article, obviously, and this stuff fascinates me. There's all this stuff about this giant tree that keeps the world together, and so I'd kind of stashed that one away. Yggdrasil. But concepts of time and space play a major role in Old Norse corpus's presentation of Norse cosmology. While events in Norse mythology describe a somewhat linear progression, various scholars in ancient Germanic studies note that Old Norse texts may imply or directly describe a fundamental belief in cyclic time. meaning that it's a the Wikipedia article that links to calls it an eternal return, which I assume means that everything is just like one big cycle. Did I update my Steam page? Shelby is asking me. Um, no. So I don't know. There's a Steam sale going on right now for the Lunar New Year, and if you they give you like these tokens for the money depending on how much money you spend, and you can use those to buy like cosmetic upgrades for your Steam profile. And they give you a base amount to start with, and the most basic amount you start with is enough to buy you this gold profile, which makes your name gold for the rest of the month. And I just did that for giggles because I don't intend to buy anything and I don't want to mess around with anything. Looks like my friend Jason is online. I'm gonna see if he wants to come on the stream or if he even responds. I haven't heard back from him in like a month, but we'll try. So mythology and cosmology and uh, paganism and uh, antiquated religions and what have you. I think that stuff is really fascinating, and I really want to read this Wikipedia article. Although I am afraid that it might not be nearly as interesting to anyone else as it is to me. And not Jason the murderer, Jason the Hunt. His last name is Hunt. He's Jason. Oh my word. He actually responded. I'm going to tell him where we are. Anyways, we'll see if he actually gets on. Jason asking me why I changed. I changed because YouTube makes more sense for what I'm doing. If I was playing video games, I'd be on Twitch, but I'm not. There. Now we'll see if he actually gets on. If he watches, that is. Anyways, so, whoa, that is much more text than I was anticipating, but okay. So Kimmery has sent me, it looks like 2 poems. One of them I hesitate to read, but we'll start with the one that should be a little more interesting. So the first one is a sonnet entitled "Relax, Release," and that's just low hanging fruit. I'm not even gonna make a joke about that because you're all thinking it. I'm just not gonna say it. Okay, relax, release. I inhale the morning dew and dusk, exhale life and draw away the stale night, but welcome back the softened evening musk, again to find replaced by morning light. A welcome cycle, day turns into night, as life and beauty brings maturity. A horrid cycle brings me decay, a place of rest, of feigned serenity. Either focus gone without restraint sets a life into a downward pose, a spiral seeming strong yet causing faint recollections of the thoughts of those gone before, so to invite a soul peace, our deafening grasp we must relax, release. Um, okay. So I will start again by saying that I'm not very good with poetry. It's not something I understand very well. Let's see here. If if I had to give a criticism, I might say something about using the word musk, which is kind of, it makes me just think of like kind of a nasty smell, personally. I don't know if that's what you were going for, but that's what it makes me think of. Light, dusk, night, dusk and musk, night and light, day and decay, maturity, serenity. Maturity and serenity don't necessarily rhyme as well as they could. See, pose and those, and faint in peace, release. I hesitate. I hesitate to criticize. Um, I hesitate to criticize one of the few people that joins us on stream. And speaking of people joining us on stream, Jason, if you actually clicked on that link and you're listening to us now, please send me a message in chat, either on YouTube or Steam, so that way we know that you're actually a cool guy. Thank you, Jason. Anyways, poem, welcome back, soften evening musk, again to find replacement. It's kind of depressing. That's certainly something. Okay, thank you for coming on the stream, Jason. You are a cool guy. I can. Kimmery is saying that I can always tell her what I like about the thing. Um, I'm trying to decide. I really wasn't sure what to expect. I kind of expected the second one, the pun poem. I kind of figured that you would probably write a poem based on puns, Kimmery. Um, I wasn't expecting the first one. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing for you, but uh, I inhale the morning dew and dusk, exhale life and draw away the stale night. But welcome back the softened evening musk, again to find replaced by morning light. A welcome cycle, day turns into night, day turns into day. Okay, if I might also say that the rhythm is a little weird. At least it feels weird to me. Life and beauty bring maturity. A hard cycle bringing me decay. The one of the few things I remember about poetry was like the rhythm of words and like stressed and unstressed syllables. And that was something I've always struggled with. It's trying to understand, like, because I don't think of words in terms of that. Jason says he's listening but won't be nearby to type. That's fine. Thanks for coming on stream, Jason. Um, hard cycle bringing me decay. What I like about it, I do like that you first and foremost are willing to share your poem with me, especially because it seems very personal. That takes a lot of courage. And I'll tell you this, I don't think it's nearly as pretentious as that other stuff we were reading in the Slick Folio. Horde cycle bring me decay, place of rest of feigned serenity. Yeah, I like it. Um, Maybe work on rhythm, maybe. If you care at all, because honestly, the nice thing about poetry and art is that it doesn't matter what everyone else thinks. It just matters how you feel about it. So if you're happy with it, uh, if you feel like you express some deep part of yourself, then don't let me rain on your parade. Especially because it sounds like your parade is already kind of rainy. Okay. Okay, I'll read your second one now. Shelby just calls it the pun poem. Um, Piece, a single section that is actually whole. A sliver I take for granted, the necessary part of my being. Not the silence of the world, but the silence of the soul, the feeling that envelops me entirely, but leaves me feeling free. I inhale, I exhale, inhale, exhale, to breathe without suffocating weight, to look without exhaustion, to move without fatigue, to live without feeling like I'm dying. As humans, we live in our heads. We think and we think and we think. We absorb information. We rarely let it leave. But once one of us just lets go, releasing their death grip on reality, for as creatures we fear the unknown, that faithful release sends us to a place we finally feel peace. That section that is actually a whole, a sliver we take for granted, that necessary part of our being. Not the silence of the world, but the silence of the soul, the feeling that envelops us entirely, but leaving us feeling free. We inhale, we exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, peace. Well, I think this one should be called Lama's class, because that's what it sounds like to me. Um, I don't know. Admittedly, the first one, the relaxed release, uh, relaxed release, I guess, is a little more tight. You know what I mean? Like it's a little better done. I don't think the second one is bad though. I find it maybe a little more relatable than the first one actually, even though I don't really understand it. And like the fact that the second one doesn't really rhyme, like, because the thing about rhyme and rhythm and all that stuff is that if you have it, you have to stick to it, because otherwise, it's the quality is going to go down. But the nice thing about the second one is that it's not really, there's not really a whole lot of rhyme to it to begin with, and it's, I did not catch the pun, and the rhythm is a little better. The rhythm is a little more free, so it's like you don't stumble over it, you know? So I don't know, I might actually like the second one better. I did not catch the pun, as I said. But somebody just sent me something on Steam. My brother-in-law, he says, I'm 99% sure if you were to hang this up in your room, you'd never have sex. And I was expecting something terrible, but it's actually just like a big collage poster of like science fiction characters. I'm going to respond to him. I'm 99% sure that I'm not having sex anyway. We'll see if he responds. I was expecting something like really bad, but I don't know. This poster is actually kind of nice. Okay, so you're saying about the poem, peace makes you feel whole, and then peace is a part of the whole. It's kind of an interesting play on words, especially that line, a single section that is actually whole. That's actually really creative. Because, like, you might take something like a, um, how would you describe it? I guess if you were to think about like a gemstone, like a gemstone might be broken off from a bigger piece of a gem, you know? Like you might have a big chunk of quartz or a ruby or whatever, and you would have this big hunk of ruby, and you cut off a piece of it, a chunk of it, and then you file that down into like a ring. And so you could view that as just a little piece. You say, well, I had this big ruby, and now all I have is this little gemstone for the ring. Or alternatively, you could say, no, this is the whole gem. This is everything. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone aside from me, but no, that's actually really clever. So the way I see it is that you have uh, like a little piece of your life, which you could view in a way where it's maybe not enough, and instead you understand that this is plenty, that this is everything you need. That's how I see it, anyways. So that's how I view it anyway. That's very clever. Good job. A sliver I take for granted. Yeah. So you follow it up with that. A necessary part of my being, not the sense of the world, but the sense of the soul. I suppose if I had to interpret this one, I might say that it's about how peace comes from within instead of relying on outside sources, which is a great little perspective to have. So yeah, I actually like the second one a little better than the first. I understand the second one a little more. I relate to it a little better. But anyways, thank you for sharing your poems, Kimmery. Uh, it went from yourself to everyone. Let's see here. Did it? It's actually whole. Sorry, I take from first person to second person. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're right. It does shift perspectives. Very subtle. Very good. Thank you again, Kimmery. I know it can be. I don't know if you were at all anxious to share it, but I appreciate that you did. Um, and I know I'm only speaking to like 3 people here, but if you do have a poem that you want me to read that you wrote or that you plagiarized from someone, send it to me and I'll probably read it because I am desperate for stuff to read. Okay. Ugh. I must have done something to my arm. I might have pulled a muscle, or maybe I'm just a big baby. Something kind of hurts in it, though. So let's see here. I do have, like I said, I have 6 Wikipedia articles I was intending to read in my Firefox window. And since I switched to Google Chrome, I don't look at those articles anymore. I have them stashed, but I never actually like have them in front of me, you know? Like when I was using Firefox, every time I'd open up my web browser, I would see uh, the Wikipedia articles that I had, and I'd be like, I'll read it later. But since I switched to Google Chrome, I don't see them anymore. There is one article. I don't know if I'll read it in full, but it's the story of Finn McCool. Finn McCool? McCool or McCool. He was a mythic hunter warrior from Irish mythology, occurring also in the mythologies of Scotland and the Isle of Man. As a part of the Red Branch cycle, formed the Fenian cycle. Uh, Much of it is narrated in the voice of Fion's son, or Fion's son, or Finn's son, the poet Oisin. So as far as mythology goes, a lot of people talk about like Norse mythology, and they talk about uh, Greek mythology. Norse mythology is like Thor and Odin, and uh, that's actually where J.R.R. Tolkien got a lot of his inspiration from, because the idea of dwarves and the idea of elves, those ideas come from Norse mythology originally. And so J.R.R. Tolkien, if I'm not mistaken, was a huge fan of Richard Wagner. Or no, maybe I've got that backwards. Richard Wagner was a composer, a German composer who loved Norse mythology, and he also loved the opera. And so he wrote this big opera epic about Norse mythology called Der Valkyrie. I'm sure I'm butchering that, and I'm sorry, Kimmery. I know it's my German is terrible, but he wrote the Valkyrie. And if you've ever heard Ride of the Valkyries, bum ba da ba bum bum ba da ba bum, that was him. And that guy, Richard Wagner, he just loved writing operas. Like he had just this like big, intensive like 9 hour opera, and he had to split it into like three parts because no one would sit through the whole thing. Anyways, so people like to talk about Norse mythology, which is really popular. Um, no, I could not sing that again, but thank you for asking, Shelby. There's also Greek mythology, which is like Zeus, Hades, Icarus, the story of the boy who flew too close to the sun. Those two branches of mythology are perhaps the most well known. Whenever people want to add some mysticism to their stories, they'll usually draw from those. They'll add Valkyries or they'll add the Greek pantheon. And there's things like the Homer epics, the Homeric epics, I think is what the term would be called. Um, that's things like the Iliad and the Odyssey, which are incredible works of some of the oldest fiction that we have. And they're incredible because they're so old, but in a lot of ways, even though we don't necessarily relate to every detail, the broad strokes of it are still very relatable about the thirst for glory and the call to adventure and all this stuff. And they've been a particularly big influence on storytelling ever since. So you have the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, and then you have the Norse of the Norse, of course. Poet's Delay by Henry David Thoreau. I'll take a look at that in a second, Kimmery. Um, but one of my personal favorites, one of the most underrated, is Irish mythology, particularly the Ulster cycle, the Red Branch cycle, which is something I've taken a read on in my own spare time, and unfortunately have not had the time that I wanted to dedicate to it because it is absolutely incredible. I'm gonna take a look at some of my notes, some of the folklore and mythology from that particular area of Europe. So there's something called a church grim for one thing. A grim is like a guardian spirit, and a church grim is an overseer of the welfare of a particular church who protects the churchyards and particularly the people buried there. The idea was that if whoever was buried first in a plot of land, their spirit would be appointed to guard over that plot of land, especially when it was sacred. Read some Edgar Allan Poe. I love Poe. I'm gonna hold off on reading Poe for right now, just because he's very depressing. But we'll get to Poe at some point, I promise. But anyways, the Church Grim usually in order to protect the land, but to have they didn't want to sacrifice somebody they loved to forever protect this land. So what people would do is they would usually get a dog and kill it or let it die or whatever, and then they would bury that first in the churchyard. And they believed that the spirit of this dog would guard the churchyard. It would protect them from thieves, vandals, witches, warlocks, and even the devil himself. Um, it was usually depicted as a large black dog, a specter, not an actual dog, but like more like a ghost. According to Yorkshire tradition, uh, the church grim, which is what that spirit is called, is known to toll the bell at midnight before a death takes place. During funerals, the presiding clergyman may have seen the grim looking out from the church tower and determine from its aspect whether the soul of the deceased is destined for heaven or hell. The grim inhabits the churchyard day and night and is associated with dark, stormy weather. It's kind of interesting. You wouldn't necessarily think Christianity to associate like guardian spirits like that, but it was very common in Europe. at least common enough to make note of it. In Scotland, the spirit of the person most recently buried in a churchyard had to protect it until the next funeral provided a new guardian to replace them. This churchyard vigil was known as Fairclade. Fairclade? I don't know how to pronounce Scottish. Um, let's see here. Being sacrificed in the place of a human being. The Scandinavians had a similar legend, but instead of burying a lamb but would bury a lamb instead. No, I don't believe the Grimm brothers are the guardians of storytelling. I believe that's just coincidence, Kimmery. Um, so the Scandinavians would bury a lamb. If a person entered the church at a time when services were not being held, he had a chance of seeing the lamb. If it appeared in the graves, then it portended the death of a child. The lamb was used as a ritual connection to Christ, but other animals would sometimes be used, such as boars or pigs or horses. A grave sow, or grey sow, was often seen in the streets of Kroskjoberg, where it was regarded as an omen of death. So you also have things like the fairies, which is I that's sort of a Scots Gaelic thing, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, English. Fairies, of course, are a common folk tale. Let's see here. So the modern English word silly is actually believed to derive from Old English, the word seely, Seely, which refers to somebody who is happy or lucky or blessed rather, and usually pertain to fairies. Um, so the categorization of fairies was based on courts, whether the fairy was light or dark, the division into seely or unseely spirits, which was roughly equivalent to the division of elves in Norse mythology, who were distinguished by being light or dark. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't believe that necessarily being light or dark was necessarily a good or bad thing on its own, although people tended to gravitate to think that light was good and dark was bad. Um, um, okay, or maybe not. I'm trying to find. I have all these notes, and I'm trying to find something that would be interesting to read. Uh, which is surprisingly difficult. You know, I'm just going to read this one. This one's like a paragraph long. I don't know how to pronounce this properly. I'm just going to assume it's spelled Gwri. That's a name. Gwri. Gwiri? It's a Welsh name, so I have no idea. Gwiri of the Golden Hair. In the first branch of Welsh mythology, Mabinogi, Terranon, the house of Gwentis Coed, which means below the wood, is a horse lord whose fine mare foals every May Eve, but the foals go missing each year. To try and prevent this, he takes his mare to the house and sits vigil with her. Shortly after the foal is born, a monstrous claw tries to take it through the window. Terranon slashes the hand with his sword and chases it outside. The monster is gone, but a human baby is left at his door. He and his wife adopt the child and name him Gwiri Walt Iron, Gwiri of the Golden Hair. The child grows at a superhuman pace and develops great affinity for horses. As he develops, Terranon recognizes the child as having a resemblance to Pwyll, the king of Dyfed. He returns the child to his honorable home and his mother, Rhiannon, an otherworld woman who also has a great affinity for horses. When he was born, the child went missing under the care of 6 sleepy maids, and to cover up their uh, failure, they kill a pup and smear its blood on Rhiannon's face to accuse her of cannibalism and infanticide. Infanticide? Probably that. Since then, her penance was to sit every day by the gate of the castle at the horse block, to telling her story to travelers and offering to carry them on her back, while still maintaining her state as queen. With the child returned, his mother is cleared from her penance and is formally named Pedere, a play on words meaning delivered slash worry. So that's Gwiri of the Golden Hair, as far as I can tell. Folk tales tend to get kind of weird like that. Like you have like these random numbers, like six sleepy maids, and they frame the queen to cover up their own failures, and then as penance, she has to carry people on her back while still technically being queen. It's doesn't really make sense, but maybe that's why those things get so popular. Is because they don't make sense, so that's why they stick out in people's minds and they keep passing those stories along for centuries. Okay, here's one that's kind of interesting. The Morrigan. The Morrigan means either phantom or great queen. It is an Irish mythological figure associated with war and fate, usually appearing as a crow. Uh, she is believed to be a manifestation of the earth and sovereignty, chiefly representing the goddess's role as guardian of the territory and its people. The Morrigan is often described as a trio of sisters called the Three Morrigna. The etymology of Morrigans is sometimes thought to come from Scandinavian or Slavic words that translated roughly to Nightmare Queen. And if that's not the coolest stuff you've ever heard, then get out of my face. I probably did tell you to read The Raven, Shelby, because that's like the best Edgar Allan Poe Raven story. Of course, The Cask of Amontillado is also great. Let's see here. Okay, so after all this, I'm basically back to Finn McCool of Irish myth. So the thing about Finn McCool is that for a long time, even though he's a mythology figure, oh no, wait, I'm thinking of someone else. Dang nabbit, I'm not back to Finn McCool. Cullen's Hound. I was actually thinking of Q Cullen, uh, an Irish figure who was believed to be historical for a long time from the Irish mythology, the Ulster Cycle. Um, Q Cullen was believed to be an incarnation of the god Luch, who was also his father, not unlike how people see Jesus and God as being the same being, even though God is, the idea is that God is Jesus' father and also the same person. Don't ask me how that makes sense, because I don't know. Anyways, back to Q Cullen. His mother is the mortal Deictine, sister of Conchobar Macnessa. So, Q Cullen is a name that means Cullen's Hound. Uh, Cullen's Hound. And Q Cullen was born Setanta, uh, but he gained his better known name as a child after killing Cullen's fierce guard dog in self defense and offering to take his place as a replacement. Um, so, essentially becoming a guard dog. Let's see, at the age of 17, he defended Ulster single-handedly against the armies of Queen Medb of Connacht in the famous cattle raid of Cooley. It was prophesied that his great deeds would eventually give him everlasting fame, but his life would be a short one. He is known for his terrifying battle frenzy, or Riostrad, translated by some as a warp spasm or as torque, in which he becomes an unrecognizable monster who knows neither friend nor foe. He fights from his chariot, driven by his loyal charioteer Leg, and drawn by his horses. In more modern times, Q Cullen is often referred to as the Hound of Ulster. According to Wikipedia, he shows striking similarities to a legendary Persian hero, Rostam, as well as Germanic lay of Hildebrand, and the labors of the Greek epic hero Hercules, suggesting a common Indo-European origin. Make of that what you will. Uh, let's see here. I believe it was Q Cullen himself. He had many skills, and he tried to enter into Cullen's court originally, or perhaps this was his father, but I suppose it's the same person technically, just different incarnations. But he tried to enter into the court with his talents, and he talked to the guardians of the courts, and he said, I can fight, I can sing, I can dance, I can do all this stuff. And they're like, we already have people for that. He says, yeah, but do you have one person that can do all of it? And they're like, oh, dang, son. Yeah, you're right. We don't. Why don't you come in? And that was the story of how Q Cullen got into the court. Or maybe it was his father. I don't know. Mythology is confusing. But I think Irish myth is so incredible, and it's all these wars over like herds of cattle and all this like weird stuff, but also very human, reincarnation and all this stuff. So I've been dying for the chance to read over it, but it's not very well known. It's hard to find books on it, and I only found one book for sale, one like textbook, and that was like $200. Anyways, Henry. Okay, so Kimmery had first suggested Henry David Thoreau. Let's take a look at that. The Poet's Delay by Henry David Thoreau. All right, let's take a look. This one is really short, actually. Um, In vain I see the morning rise, in vain observe the western blaze, who idly look to other skies, expecting life by other ways. Amid such boundless wealth without, I only still am poor within. The birds have sung their summer out, but still my spring does not begin. Shall I then wait the autumn wind, compelled to seek a milder day, and leave no curious nest behind, no wood still echoing to my day? Hmm. In vain I see the morning rise, in vain observe the western blaze, idly look to others, expecting life by other ways. Such bounty, boundless wealth without, I only still am poor within. The birds have sung their summer out, but still my spring does not begin. Yeah, I don't understand it. It's a nice poem, though. Henry David Thoreau, of course. What is he considered? Transcendentalist? Yes, leading transcendentalist. Um, Known for Walden and civil disobedience. I've been intending to read Walden at some point. Never gotten around to it, though. Hmm. I wish I knew more about poetry, but I don't, so I'm mostly just improvising here. I knew a man by sight, a blameless wight, who, for a year or more, had daily passed my door. Yet converse none had had with him. Maybe I'll restart. So this is I Knew a Man by Sight by Henry David Thoreau. I just picked it at random. We'll see how it goes. I knew a man by sight, a blameless wight, who, for a year or more, had daily passed my door, yet converse none had had with him. I met him in the lane, him and his cane, about 3 miles from home, where I had chanced to roam, and volumes stared at him, and he at me. In a more distant place, I glimpsed his face, and bowed instinctively. Starting, he bowed to me, bowed simultaneously, and passed along. Next, in a foreign land, I grasped his hand, and had a social chat about this thing and that, as I had known him well 1,000 years. Late in a wilderness, I shared with his mess, where he had hardships seen, and I, a wanderer being. He was my bosom friend, and I was his. And as methinks shall all, both great and small, that ever lived on earth, early or late their birth, stranger and foe, one day each other know. I guess that's about friendship and strangers, I guess. Although I do want to point out one word, which is in the second line. It's white, Wight. Um, White is an old word that refers to somebody who is a specific sort of person, usually somebody who's unfortunate. It's often used in a literary context as a spirit or ghost or supernatural being. A Song of Ice and Fire used it to refer to people who were resurrected. They were like, "Oh, that's the White," and then it ended up being a pun because there's like the White Walkers and all that stuff. But anyways, all right. I think I'm going to be taking a quick break here. I need to get some drink for my parched throat. And so in the meantime, I'm going to be playing just a song. I'll be back in a moment, but you know, don't stay up. That song, it's not too bad. Although I think I might defer to something a little quieter. What do you guys think? Is that a good song? Let me know. Or don't. It's none of my business. Or is it? Okay, we had talked about Edgar Allan Poe. Kind of hyped it up. Originally, I had kind of thought that I would read Edgar Allan Poe around Halloween time last year, but I didn't end up reading, I don't think at all. I kind of pooped out. I can certainly read Edgar Allan Poe if you so like. Ugh. No one's gonna stop me if I do. As far as that song goes, I chose it because I don't think I have to pay any money to use it. I might try a different one, but that'll do for tonight, I guess. So we do want a little bit of Edgar Allan Poe. Is that correct, Shelby? Jason, I think Jason is probably sleepies. But before I read anything else about Edgar Allan Poe, there is one thing I would like to mention. The Poe toaster. So, a bottle of cognac and 3 roses were left at Poe's original grave marker for decades every January 19th, which is the day he died. No, I'm sorry, that was the day he was born. Every January 19th by an unknown visitor, affectionately referred to as the Poe toaster. Not bread toaster, more like a drink toaster. Um, there was a historian in Baltimore where Poe was buried who claimed that he started the tradition, but his story was not confirmed, and some of the details he gave to the press were factually inaccurate. Um, but nobody knows who ever left uh, the cognac and the 3 roses at Poe's grave, but it happened for decades. The last appearance was in 2009, which is 200 years after Poe's birth. So it's an interesting little thing. So I love Edgar Allan Poe. I haven't read all of his stuff, unfortunately. I've read a Cask of Amontillado. I've read Telltale Heart. I've read The Raven. And I think that might actually be it. But I love all those. So if I'm going to be reading Poe, I think I want to read something I have not read before. Let's start with some of the poetry. Let's see. I've heard. Yeah, we'll just start with The Raven. I've read The Raven, but it's so great that you can't not read The Raven. There are some incredible readings of this story, of this poem. Um, James Earl Jones, who was the voice of Darth Vader, did one. You can find that on YouTube. Uh, Obviously, I cannot possibly hope to match that. I mean, it's James Earl Jones. No one can match him. But I tell you what, I'm going to give a read to The Raven. Okay. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, Over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore. While I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as if some one gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this, and nothing more." Ah, distinctly I remember 'twas in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my book surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now to still the beating of my heart I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping, tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you." Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore?" This I whispered, and an echo muttered back the word, "Lenore!" Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, nor not a moment stopped or stayed he, but, with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird, beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly grim and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marvelled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculpted bust above his chamber door, with such a name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "Other friends have flown before, on the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before." Then the bird said, "Nevermore." Startled at the stillness broken by a reply so aptly spoken, "Doubtless," said I, "what it utters is only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmercifully disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of nevermore." But the raven still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then, upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, "Nevermore." This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom, into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er shall she possess, ah, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung from swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, respite and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this coin nepenthe and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempest sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by what God we both adore. Tell this soul with sorrow laden, if, within the distant Aidenn, it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting. Get thee up, get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of thy lie, of the lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my chamber door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy phone from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas up just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. That's a fun little poem to read, even though I stumbled over it. That one's a classic. It never gets old. So Shelby was asking me what the story was about killing the old man. That's the Telltale Heart, and I'll read that one as well. It may be worth noting about this poem, The Raven, is that the narrator, he wonders, he's like, what does that mean, nevermore? He asks it in the poem itself, and we, the reader, might read that ourselves and feel that connection. One of these days, I'd like to do an actual proper, perfect reading, one where I don't actually stumble over it. And then I'd like to upload that one to YouTube as its own separate video. Probably, if all goes well, it might be good promotion for the channel. But yeah, The Raven is definitely one of my favorites. I'm going to also read, while I'm thinking about it, Ozymandias, the poem. I was thinking about it, because I like The Raven, and I like Ozymandias, which are some of the few poems that I can remember off the top of my head. I did not mean to read The Raven quite so fast. That's just kind of how it goes. Like Poe, he just like starts spitting out words, and like you just feel yourself tumbling down, which is part of the brilliance of the poem. It's great. I love The Raven. But so there's a line in The Raven which goes, the pallid bust of Pallas. Pallid is like a pale, and Pallas is a name. But the comic Watchmen, one of the characters wrote a dissertation, I guess you'd call it, or an essay about that particular line. And another character in Watchmen named himself Ozymandias after a poem by Percy Bysshe? I don't know. Percy Bysshe Shelley. This is another one of my favorites. This one was read by Bryan Cranston, actually, as part of Breaking Bad. And he, of course, has an incredible voice. It's one of those things where I can't do it justice, at least not to the extent that he does. I've put his reading on the playlist of videos I've mentioned, and every video that I mentioned that I like is going to be on that playlist. Definitely check out his, because he has just this deep cadence that I can't hope to match. But I love this poem, so I'm going to read it anyway. This is Ozymandias. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless lakes of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survived, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains, round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." Now, that's the entirety of the poem. I don't know how easy it was to catch, but essentially the narrator is talking about a statue of Ramses II, who was a conqueror. And in the middle of a desert, there's nothing, right? There's just sand as far as the eye can see. But there's this beautiful statue that is crumbled and half sunk into the sand. And on a pedestal for it reads, "My name is Ozymandias. I am the King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, in despair." But you look around and there's nothing. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Now, I guess you could call it an aesthetic. That's kind of the parlance of our times, as it were. Um, I have this preference aesthetic for the desert, for the vast stretches of sand, and you don't see it too often, or at least not as often as I would like. But um, I love that desert aesthetic. I love the look of it, the feel of it. There's something really mystical about a desert and just vast, endless stretches of sand and stone. It's great. But that poem really encapsulates that aesthetic for me. If I had to ever describe my love for the desert and the appearance of the desert, I'm going to cite Ozymandias, which just perfectly does it. And I could go on about that, but it'd mostly just be me rambling and stumbling over my own thoughts. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to go back to Edgar Allan Poe, who's great. I'm going to read The Telltale Heart, because that's relatively short, but absolutely amazing. It's the beating of that hideous heart. Like I said, Poe is just amazing for Halloween, and I wish this is that time of year, but it's not. So this is a story, not a poem, but I'm going to read it. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been, and am, but why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How, then, am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily, how calmly I tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Hold on. Okay. Just wanted to update the stream. It haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, so that no light shone out. And then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening, so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye, and this I did for 7 long nights, every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber, and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a haughty tone, inquiring how he passed the night. So you see he would have been a very profound old man, indeed, to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there were, to think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still, and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or grief. Oh no, it was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it had welled up from within my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor," or "It is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him, and enveloped the victim, and it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length, a simple dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot out from the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct, precisely upon that damned spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the sense? Now I say, there came to my ears a low, quick, dull sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eve. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still, but the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leapt into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him, and then I smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon his heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. Ha ha! When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought back chairs into the room, and desired them to rest there from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself growing pale and wishing them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained defi- definiteness, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased. What could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited by fury, excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore, I swung the chair upon which I had been singing, and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die, and now again, hark! Louder, 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 louder! Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more! I admit the deed! Tear up the planks! Here, here! It is the beating of his hideous heart. So that's the Telltale Heart. You're welcome. I couldn't help get into that one. I like that story. You got to do it justice, you know. I think it might be fair to say that Edgar Allan Poe influenced some of my own ideas of horror, kind of about like people being stricken by madness to do deeds they don't really understand. Um, I don't want to necessarily compare myself to Poe because he's like so much better than him. He's so much better than me, of course. But I do kind of see similarities to I do see similarities between the Telltale Heart and Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Obviously, Poe is so much better. Like he has just this incredible way of carrying a rhythm throughout his story. And while Poe kind of explores the consequences of madness in this one, Blood, Sweat, and Tears is just about the madness, and then the rest of it is like left unspoken. But I definitely think that this inspired that story. Anyways, that's definitely one of my favorite horror stories. There are others too. I've heard The Mask of the Red Death is good. Fall of the House of Usher, The Black Cat, The Cask of Amontillado is famous. I don't think I'll read that one though. That's kind of long. Murders in the Rue Morgue. Yeah. One of the first detective stories, um, that is to say, the first modern detective stories, is attributed to Edgar Allan Poe, which is The Murders in the Rue Morgue. But that's like 42 pages, so I don't know if I want to read that. I should have read Telltale Heart last. That took a lot out of me. I didn't think I was going to get that into it, but I mean, you have to. Let's see, The Black Cat. Let's see how long that one is. The Black Cat. 4,000 words. Okay, so The Telltale Heart was like 2,000 words, just shy of 2,100 words. Um, Edgar Allan Poe had a similar story uh, called The Black Cat. Short and happy. Uh, I'm something short and happy. I don't know. I honestly I'm not like the most well-read person, but I have a love for Edgar Allan Poe because I feel like at the risk of what's the word? What would you call that putting yourself on a pedestal, like making yourself out to be greater than you deserve to be? Allan Poe, Alan Moore. I don't actually care. I'm not gonna correct my pronunciation if there even is a difference. Because I don't actually care. There are so many short stories to go over. Like I said, I wish I was more well read. Oh, you're right. Dang nabbit. That's embarrassing. Here I am talking about how much I like Allan Poe. Oh well. Good catch, by the way. H.G. Wells, George Orwell, Nathaniel Hawthorne, W.W. Jacobs. Oh, very nice. Sharing a birthday with Edgar Allan Poe. Um, Virginia Woolf apparently had a short story called A Haunted House, which is 700 words. That is tiny. Like my writing goal is like 1,000 words a day, so that's really small. And shoot, how long was Let's see, how long was Blood, Sweat, and Tears? Blood, Sweat, and Tears was like 3,500 words, just shy of that. Man, Edgar Allan Poe can do so much more with. Okay, Jason's logging off. Thank you for coming onto the stream, Jason. It's nice to hear from you once in a while. Uh, stay safe, avoid pornography, sleep well, all that good stuff. I should talk louder. I was like shouting into the microphone, Kimmery. If it's not loud enough for you, you need like headphones or something. Um, Shelby says goodbye, Jason. I don't know. Is there such thing as a happy short story? Probably not. I don't know what to tell you, lady. I guess I shouldn't call you lady. I should probably call you by your name. I am like, that was me yelling, okay? Like, I was like worried that my roommate was gonna hear me. I mean, he yells all the time, so even if he does, he probably wouldn't care. But, um, are there happy short stories? I'm gonna read like a Reader's Digest or something. I am not reading The Turnip. No. 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 The Velveteen Rabbit. This is uh, kind of a random spiel. Not that that's ever stopped me, but I have a memory, like a very distant memory of when I was a kid, of like reading these kids' books, and the art style was like so distinctive, and I can almost see it in my head, but I have a hard time describing it. Maybe it was the Little Golden Book. I remember those vaguely. Marguerite Williams. I remember those Little Golden Books. And like in my head, like I can still see it, but I can't remember what it's called. Mrs. Tiddlywinks by Beatrix Potter. It almost sounds like a joke. Mrs. Tiddly. Wait. Yeah, Mrs. Tiddlywinks. That is a book. Tiggy-Winkle? I think I've kind of mentioned on stream. I don't know if Kimmery was paying attention at the time, but I have this idea in my head of what a perfect fantasy story might look like, and I can kind of see it, but I have the hardest time describing it. Not even in like a literary sense, but like just in general. And so kind of my goal as a writer is to be able to one day articulate that. And I've been having a hard time with that. And it's weird because like you have this idea in your head, but like words just fail you, even though it's like this visual thing. It's like you're in awe of your own ideas. Oh, that's kind of interesting. I looked up just for giggles, happy short stories, And one of them is a story called The Great Feast by Laura E. Richards. Didn't know she was a writer. But anyways, it's Tiggy Prince. I don't know if I can get a hold of Mrs. Tiddlywinks. That might be like a book that I would have to like pirate or something. Angel in Disguise by T.S. Right. Sorry, I just looking over things, trying to decide how I feel about them. Granville Levison Gower? Go to the library. This might be considered piracy, this link you just sent me. I don't know if I've ever heard of this story. Let's take a look here. Alright, go to the library. I don't have time for that. I don't have time to pick out a book or read. Who has time for that? And I'm also too tired to fight, so I'm just going to go ahead and read that story. If I get sued, I'm going to blame it all on you guys, though. This says here that this is a Flesh Kincaid readability level 5.0. That might be a little tough for me. I don't know if I can manage, but I'll do what I can. Once upon a time, there was a little girl called Lucy who lived at a farm called Littletown. She was a good little girl, only she was always losing her pocket handkerchiefs. One day, little Lucy came into the farmyard crying. Oh, did she cry so! I've lost my pocket handkin. These 3 handkins and a penny. Have you seen them, Tabby Kitten? The kitten went on washing her white paws. So Lucy asked the speckled hen, Sally Hennypenny, have you found 3 pocket handkins? But the speckled hens ran into a barn, clucking. I go barefoot, barefoot, barefoot. And then Lucy asked Cock Robin, sitting on a twig. Cock Robin looked sideways at Lucy with his bright black eye, and he flew over a stile and away. Lucy climbed up on the stile and looked up at the hill behind Littletown, a hill that goes up, up into the clouds, as though it had no top. And a great way up in the hillside she thought she saw some white things spread upon the grass. Lucy scrambled up the hill as fast as her short legs would carry her. She ran along a steep pathway, up and up, until Littletown was right away down below. She could have dropped a pebble down the chimney. Presently she came to a spring, bubbling out from the hillside. Some one had stood a tin can upon a stone to catch the water, but the water was already running over, for the can was no bigger than an egg cup, and where the sand upon the path was wet, there were footmarks of a very small person. Lucy ran on and on. The path ended under a big rock. The grass was short and green, and there were clothes props cut from bracken stems, with lines of plaited rushes and a heap of tiny clothespins, but no pocket handkerchiefs. But there was something else. A door, straight into the hill, and inside it someone was singing, "Lily white and clean, oh, with little frills between, oh, soft and hot red rusty spot, never here be seen, oh." Lucy knocked once, twice, and interrupted the song. A little frightened voice called, "Who is that?" Lucy opened the door, and what do you think was inside the hill? A nice clean kitchen with a flagged floor and wooden beams, just like any other farm kitchen. Only the ceiling was so low that Lucy's head nearly touched it, and the pots and pans were small, and so was everything there. There was a nice hot singy smell, and at the table, with an iron in her hand, stood a very stout short person staring anxiously at Lucy. Her print gown was tucked up, and she was wearing a large apron over her striped petticoat. Her little black nose went sniffle, sniffle, snuffle, and her eyes went twinkle, twinkle, and underneath her cap, where Lucy had yellow curls, that little person had prickles. "Who are you?" asked Lucy. "Have you seen my pocket handkins?" The little person made a bob courtesy. "Oh, yes, if you please'm. My name is Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. Oh, yes, if you please'm. I am an excellent clear starcher." And she took something out of the clothes basket and spread it on the ironing blanket. "What's that thing?" said Lucy. "That's not my pocket handkin. Oh, no, if it please'm. That's a little scarlet waistcoat belonging to Cock Robin." She ironed it and folded it and put it on one side. Then she took something else off a clothes horse. "That isn't my pinny?" asked Lucy. "Oh, no, if it please'm. That's a damask tablecloth belonging to Jenny Wren. Look how it's stained with currant wine." "It's very bad to wash," said Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle's nose went sniffle, sniffle, snuffle, and her eyes went twinkle, twinkle, and she fetched another hot iron from the fire. "There's one of my pocket handkins," cried Lucy, "and there's my penny." Mrs. Tiggy, ah, jeez Louise. Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle ironed it and goffered it and shook out the frills. "Oh, that is lovely," said Lucy. "And what are those long yellow things with fingers like gloves?" "Oh, that's a pair of stockings belonging to Sally Hennypenny. Look how she's worn the heels out with the scratching in the yard. She'll very soon go barefoot," said Mrs. Ugh! Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. "Why, there's another handkersniff, but it isn't mine. It's red. Oh, no, if it please'm. That one belonged to Mrs. Rabbit, and it did so smell of onions. I had to wash that separately. I can't get out that smell." "There's another one of mine," said Lucy. "What are those funny little white things?" "That's a pair of mittens belonging to Tabby Kitten. I only have to iron them. She washes them herself." "There's my last pocket handkin," said Lucy. "And what are you dipping into the basin of starch?" "They're little Dicky shirt fronts belonging to Tom Titmouse." "Come on." "Most terrible particular," said Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. "Now I've finished my ironing, I'm going to air some clothes." "What are these dear soft fluffy things?" asked Lucy. "Those are woolly coats belonging to the little lambs of Skellige." "Will their jackets take off?" asked Lucy. "Oh, yes, if it please'm. Look at the sheep mark on the shoulder, and there's one marked for Gatesgarth, and three that come from Littletown. They're always marked at washing," said Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle, and she hung up all sorts and sizes of clothes, small brown coats of mice, and one velvety black moleskin waistcoat, and a red and a red tail coat with no tail belonging to Squirrel Nutkin. Nutkin. All right, that's not even trying on that one. And a very much shrunk blue jacket belonging to Peter Rabbit, and a petticoat, not marked, that had gone lost in the washing, and at last the blanket was empty. Then Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle made tea, a cup for herself and a cup for Lucy. They sat before the fire on a bench and looked sideways at one another, and Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle's hand, holding the teacup, was very, very brown and very, very wrinkly, with the soap suds, and all throughout her gown and her cap there were hairpins sticking wrong end out, so that Lucy didn't like to sit too near to her. When they had finished tea, they tied up the clothes in bundles, and Lucy's pocket handkerchiefs were folded up inside her clean penny and fastened with a silver safety pin. And then they made up the fire with turf, and came out and locked the door, and hid the key under the door sill. Then away down the hill trotted Lucy and Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle with the bundles of clothes. All the way down the path little animals came out of the fern to meet them. The very first that they met was Peter Rabbit and Benjamin Bunny, and she gave them their nice clean clothes, and all the little animals and birds were so very much obliged to dear Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. At the bottom of the hill, when they came to the stile, there was nothing left to carry except Lucy's one little bundle. Lucy scrambled up the stile with the very bundle in her hand, and then she turned to say good night and to thank the washerwoman. But what a very odd thing! Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle had not waited either for thanks or for the washing bill. She was running, running, running up the hill, and where was her frilled white cap, and her shawl, and her gown and petticoat? And how small she had grown, and how brown, and covered with prickles! Why, Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle was nothing but a hedgehog. Now, some people say that little Lucy had been asleep upon the stile, but then how could she have found 3 clean pocket handkins and a penny pinned with a silver safety pin? And besides, I have seen that door into the back of the hill called Cat Bells, and besides, I am very well acquainted with dear Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. Well, isn't that nice? That is definitely one of the, I guess you might call it a feminine story, and I don't mean that as an insult, of course. Just that I can't ever imagine a man writing a story like that. It's very nice, though. It's got a very cozy atmosphere to it. So I'm glad you suggested that I read it, even though it is surprisingly hard to read. You told me to read it. Are you that surprised? Oh my word. You know who you remind me of, Shelby? You're like telling me to do stuff and then you're surprised when I do it. I'm going to send you the image. You remind me of these people. That's us, by the way. The 2 people standing, the 2 lads. That's you and Kimmery. I'm just going to put that on. Oh, I have to download it. I'm going to put it on the stream. Don't you worry. Don't you worry, child. Anyway, so this is us. I'm the guy laying on the floor, and you're the one pointing at me. And also laughing because I do what you tell me to do. But, alright, well, that's it for this week, I think. We've read a lot, we've cried a lot. At least I've cried a lot. I don't know about you guys, but we actually had Jason on the stream, which I consider to be a massive success in and of itself. If there's something else you want me to say or read, don't tell me about it because I don't want to find out. I'd rather it just be like a surprise, you know? No, but if you do have other short stories, even if you think they're ridiculous, or you have like a poem or something you wrote and you want me to read it, I'll be happy to give it a look. What am I doing? But yeah, it was fun. Thank you for submitting your thing, Kimmery, and for listening to me ramble about stuff. Thanks for tuning in as usual. Big shout outs to Mrs. Tiggy-Winkles or whatever her name is. I guess I'll see you guys next week. Or not. I don't know. Maybe you won't be here. Maybe I won't be here. But thanks for joining me. And see you next time.